Welcome to Adding Fuel to the Hire, a podcast for hiring managers and job seekers across all types of dealerships. With over 20 years collective recruitment experience, Rowan, Tony and Phil draw upon their knowledge to help you navigate through the recruitment and job hunt process. For more information, head to our website, addingfueltothehire.com.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Adding Fuel to the Hire. I am your host this week, Tony, and with me today is Phil. Phil, how are you?
Good. How are you going?
I'm very well, thank you. This week we're going to be discussing the interview process and nailing that, or how to nail that.
Yep.
But more specifically from the employer's perspective.
Correct.
So we've got a separate episode on the same topic, but from the candidate's perspective.
Yep.
But today is going to be just on the employer's perspective. So I suppose starting off, it's important to understand why getting this right is so vital to your success as a company.
Yep.
I suppose many people, historically speaking, have always seen the interview as the chance for a candidate to impress an employer.
Yep.
Whereas that's been kind of flipped on its head a lot now with lower unemployment rates and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's actually just as important for an employer to make an impression on the candidate.
Yeah.
They might be going for three different roles, particularly if they're a really good candidate. They might be going for three different roles with three different competitors.
Yep.
And, it's your opportunity to, I suppose, sell your business and give them a really good first impression. And regardless of, they might not be going for multiple roles, they might just be going for your single role, but you have to sell them, or I suppose impress them enough and show that your company has more to offer than their current company.
That's right.
So regardless of whether they're on the market actively looking or they're happily employed, you're going to be selling your company to them.
That's right. Yeah. And look, a lot of candidates these days really accept jobs purely based on gut feel. They might be offered a better package elsewhere, but they might just get that really good feeling because of your interview.
Yeah.
They just think we really clicked. They showed me around the premises. I got to see everything. They introduced me to everyone during my interview. I got to have a bit of a walk around. I just got that good feeling that, this was going to work really, really, really well. So because of that particularly that first interview is really, really important.
Yeah, exactly right. So we're going to go through a couple of key points. There's so many different factors through the interview process that we can't cover off all in a 20-minute episode, but we'll go through what we deem to be or we see that as the most important ones.
Yeah.
And then, at the end, if you do have any other questions or you think there's other topics, let us know, but we'll hopefully try and cover off on most of them. I suppose first and foremost, we've touched on a couple of other episodes, but consistency is absolutely paramount. That means same interviewers, same questions, just everything that you can control is the same.
Yeah.
Do it as the same. It's like a science experiment. You're trying to pin these different people up against each other, and so you want a consistent variable to I suppose, earmark them against, and so you can make an informed decision. Having different interviewers, having different questions, it makes the process more subjective than it already is.
Yep.
As long as we're dealing with humans, it's always going to be subjective, but as making it as objective as it can be is the key.
Correct.
So if you know that you need three people to give the tick of approval for this candidate, make sure all three of those people are in that first interview for all the people that you interview. Keeping the same questions. So having a formalized interview process that you follow, that's not to say it has to be very regimented and you have to go through the process in this exact order, but you want to have, 5 to 10 questions, whatever they are, and make sure that you're ticking them off with every single person so that
that's right.
If one candidate, a good example, if one candidate gets a question that really shows, good example, if you put it into, say, a parts manager's role, you don't have a template, you're not following a particular process, you might ask one candidate, their experience on moving dead stock, because that's something that you've got going in your dealership at the time. They answer it and you go, great. They've got heaps of experience, we're confident. That's probably the biggest challenge we've got as a parts department is all our dead stock at the moment.
Yeah.
But you don't follow the same process. The next three people you interview don't get asked that question about dead stock.
Yeah.
So then when you go to sit down and compare them all, the very first person you ask that to, you're thinking, oh, they're great. They've moved dead stock before. They've got, experience doing it. You haven't asked the next three, so you don't actually know.
Yeah, no, that's right.
And so you're suddenly already endeared to that first candidate because you know that they can do it, but you don't actually know if the other three can, and they could do it just as good or have better experience with it. So you need to keep consistent. Otherwise, you can't really compare apples to apples. You're comparing apples to oranges.
That's right. And that's where it really pays off to try and make the interview more of a conversation with a time dedicated to those non-negotiables in case they haven't come up yet.
Yeah.
So what I like to do is I usually start off with, general details, we're just confirming this is where you're working, just stuff to get them talking, get them warmed up, and then just get a bit of an idea of their experience. What have they been up to? What have their roles been like? What's their day-to-day looked like? All that sort of stuff. And then go through the role at the employer. This is what it would look like. This is what it would look like for you. This is what your day-to-day would look like here. Ideally, you would want this person to do this. And at that point, I'd probably start trying to move into those questions, By the way, just to give you a bit of an idea, we've got so and so much dead stock. Have you got any experience with that? Or, I know you've mentioned you've got some experience with that. How would you manage that?
Yeah.
So trying to put a dedicated time to those sort of questions in your interview can be really, really good without trying to make it a conversation, without trying to make it an interrogation.
Yeah, so that's a really important point. And I'm glad you brought that up. It's just, just because you've got the 5 or 10 questions or points written down doesn't mean you have to tick them off in that exact order.
No, that's right.
You might sit there and go, oh, they've covered that off, they've covered that off, they've covered that off. Oh, we've got a couple of questions we'd like to ask you. Do you mind if we go through them? And then you go through your final 3 questions that didn't come up organically.
That's right. And look, if that is the case, just tell the candidate, look, we're going to have to ask these and these questions, just so you're aware, we'll probably have a more or less a casual conversation, but if we don't get through those, we'll just make sure we tick those off before the end. I've been in an interview before where they said, look, it's just going to be a casual chat. We're just going to have a bit of a talk. We just want to get to know you more and what you're all about and that sort of thing. And I said, yep, okay, great. No worries. Sounds good. And then you start talking to them and they pull out like an actual questionnaire.
Yep.
And it was question 1. And I asked you the question and I answered, okay, wrote down the notes. Question 2. And it was like that for 40 minutes. And that was it. That was really it. That was the whole interview. So that wasn't very enjoyable.
That increases anxiety, increases stress. It's not a true indicator of how people perform their job. And
not at all.
Yeah, before you know it, you're not going to get the right candidate based on that. You're
that's
going to
right.
get whoever performs better in that situation.
And whoever happens to have the better answer to those questions on that questionnaire on that particular day.
Yeah.
That's all you're getting.
Yep, exactly right. So let's say you've got your questions or even just your key points that you want to cover off that are consistent for everyone. There are a couple of particular questions that you want to ask in an interview of everyone. There's the typical boring questions that everyone would know and ask in an interview. But a really important thing to do is to mix these up and to add a little bit of life into it. Thinking outside the box and thinking laterally can, I suppose, breed more personality into your interviews, and you're going to get a lot more out of people because you're going to almost throw them off the guard and get a more raw personal answer because it is a little bit left field. Your question. So a couple of examples that we've come across in our time is especially for management positions is what's your 90-day plan if you get the job? That is an awesome question to ask because if they don't have a plan, they haven't researched, they haven't come into it thinking. If they can answer that question, then that shows that they've researched the company, they understand, they've been listening into in the interview.
Correct.
And you can have a level of confidence that their plan is on the same level as what you're thinking or vice versa, and go from there. So I suppose that's important though to ask that question at the end of the interview. If you tell them what's your plan at the start and they don't know anything about the business or what the challenges are or the opportunities, then they're not going to answer it.
You're not going to find out much about it.
But reading the room, understanding the conversation, and asking that question can be a really easy way to sort the high performers out from the low performers.
That's right. Yeah. Another good one of those is what do you think would your previous boss change about you?
Which is a good substitute for what's your biggest weakness.
Yes, and all candidates, please do not say I work too hard. It is not the right answer.
No, it is not. And this is a really good example of if you ask what's your biggest weakness, everyone that's, I suppose, done a little bit of research would expect this to come.
Yeah.
And they will have a preconceived answer.
Yeah.
And it won't be organic.
Yeah.
If you throw them off with what would your previous boss change about you? It's essentially the same question, but it's the same answer almost.
It's the same answer, but it puts it in a different light. So you come. It's technically it's the same question that leads you to a different answer.
Yeah.
Because it puts the same question into a different light.
Yep.
And
you get thrown off and you go, I have to actually think about this now.
This guy would have probably changed this and this and this about me.
Yep.
Plus, it actually gives you the opportunity to think back. What was actually my challenge in my last role? What did I find most challenging? And you can find an answer from there. It doesn't need to be something personal. It might just be, for example, my last role, I really struggled with this, and my boss had probably changed it. I'd be better at this by doing so and so and so, or changing in this sort of way.
Yep. That I suppose another trick that I've heard about companies doing, which I think is just the smartest, best thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
If you're an automotive dealership or even a truck dealership, and you've got people, I suppose, applying for a sales-based role, start the interview, build some rapport, and then say, right, we're going to go out and we're going to get in the car and you're going to drive me to get a cup of coffee.
Right.
And so they'll be thrown off immediately.
See, I'm not sure about that because what's the right answer?
So
I don't know.
No, there is no right answer. You literally invite them into your car for a cup of coffee.
Right.
So what you're then doing is you're testing their ability to hold a conversation and answer questions and think on their feet whilst driving a vehicle.
Right.
Or even sitting in the passenger seat next to you driving the vehicle.
Right.
Because as a salesperson, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for them sitting in a car, talking to prospective clients or prospective buyers about the vehicle.
Yeah.
And so it might sound crazy, but there are people that will sit in a room and they will interview really well, but put them behind the wheel of a car and they cannot multitask.
Yeah.
And I'm not encouraging anyone out there to drive unsafely and to crash their cars, but it's a reality that a lot of sales consultants will be driving and trying to sell at the same time.
Yeah. It's even if it's phone calls, you know, following up with customers and that sort of thing. So I know quite a few salespeople who've just lived far away from their job.
Yep.
And they just said, it's actually not too bad because for the hour and a half that I sit in the car, I do calls.
Yeah, exactly. So, if you are a dealership out there that's selling trucks or cars, or I suppose you could even do it for earth moving equipment to some capacity, is get them out into the stuff that they're going to be selling.
Yeah.
And see how they go. You could even do it with ag if they're going to be selling big, I suppose headers and larger tractors where you can actually fit two people in the cab. Get them in the cab and see how they perform in those closed in tight spaces. Some people don't like physical contact and how close it all can be. So throw them in there because that's going to be the situation that they're selling in more often. But it's a little trick that I heard about a couple of years ago. It's very common in the automotive industry. So
I know it would throw me off. I'd be like, is this a trick question or am I meant to say no? Or?
Yep. And everything you get from that candidate from there on out is going to be organic.
Yeah.
Because what they thought the interview was going to be and their preparation has just gone out the window.
Yeah.
They're now thinking, right, well, and that's what it's going to be. It's going to be selling cars while sitting in the car. So let's try and figure that out. Another really key important point, which is often overlooked and it's really difficult and probably overlooked just because of the awkwardness of the conversation. It's discussing salary in an interview.
Yeah.
You should never, as an employer, walk away, and it goes for candidates as well, never walk away unsure what the salary is.
Yep.
From your employer's perspective, the reason being is obvious. You don't want to, if you're paying $60,000 for a role and the candidate's wanting $100,000 for the role or is on $95,000 for the role, they're never going to take it.
Yeah.
So, how much of your time or your company's time do you want to waste before you realize that, it's just never going to work out? So you have to hit that nail on the head as early throughout the process as possible.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things we talk about the courtship phase of recruitment. You don't want to bring that topic up. You don't want to pick up the phone, get someone's resume, pick it up and go, hey, we're paying $60K. Are you okay with that? It's just going to rub people up the wrong way.
Yeah.
So you want to build that rapport first. build that relationship and then
Yep.
bring it up throughout the later stages of the interview.
That's right. Who do you think should take the first step when it comes to talking about salary? Because it's one of those things people like to dance around a little bit.
Yeah, I think as a general rule, the onus should be on the employer. But I'm also a huge advocate for if the employer doesn't tell you, then if you're a candidate, you should definitely ask.
Yes.
You need to ask. But I think as a general rule, it should be on the employer to be on the front foot
Yep.
and say something. And I think the correct wording is our company has budgeted for this position a salary package of X.
Yeah.
How does that fit in with what you're looking for?
Yeah.
Because it's really important when you do it from an employer's perspective, you're not just saying, right, it's 60K, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
That's all we think you're worth. Because if that person is on 70K and they're great and they're clearly going to bring more than $10,000 extra value than the next best person, then you want that wiggle room to negotiate.
Yeah.
So you want to do it in a way of, we've budgeted 60K for it. That's what head office has given us, the okay for at this stage. How does that fit in with what you're looking for? And that'll generally open up to a discussion of what they're currently on, what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And it'll be a lot more two-way street and give you both wiggle room.
Correct.
If things don't go to plan.
Yeah. I think always try and give a range rather than a single figure.
Yeah.
It gives you wiggle room to move within that range. The candidate will probably just hear the higher number, but it will keep them more interested than just the lower number.
Yeah.
The other thing I would just want to point out is you say, okay, so we're looking at around a salary of $70,000 to $80,000. What's your expectations like? What are you really looking for? And they say, oh, okay, well, I'm actually on 95. I'm kind of looking to make that step to the six-figure salary to the 100. Responding to that can be hard sometimes.
Yeah.
So saying something along the lines of, okay, well, look, obviously this is our upper end at the moment. But we don't want the salary to be a deal breaker. Maybe we could look at doing something else. We've got a spare vehicle we could throw in there, or something else to continue to keep that candidate keen and interested. If you're confident, you can probably make the deal a little sweeter for them if it needs be.
Yeah, that's it. Sometimes there's just nothing you can do, and the salary is just not going to match. But at least you can get that done in a way that says, well, that's fine if you're on that much. We physically can't afford it. There's no wiggle room. We're sorry, but leave it in a way that, leaves a good taste in their mouth.
Yeah.
It's nothing personal. And at least in the future, if a role does come up that does suit their salary expectations, then, hey, it could tick the boxes and things line up.
That's right.
But it's an important question to ask. And, there's so many reasons why you would want to ask it. But for the very least, you should be doing it for market research.
Yeah.
If you're interviewing every service advisor and asking them what they're currently, well, not asking what they're currently on, but telling them, this is what we're paying, where does that fit for you? And you're getting 90% of the time them turn around and go, oh, well, I'm on more now, so I didn't think it'd be that low. Well, then that's really good evidence as a hiring manager to go back to your boss and say, we're 10K under industry average here.
Yeah.
I've interviewed 7 people this week and they've all said the same thing. I've had a great example of a client recently that did the exact same thing. They were interviewing people, 7, 8 people in a row all said, this is way below what I'm getting paid.
Yeah.
He went back to the DP, told him, and the pay rate got lifted up by $5 an hour because they hadn't touched it in 10 years.
Yeah.
And they realized just by talking to people about salary, they were so far out of the market.
Yeah. Plus, it might actually save you from having to replace current employees because you can say, oh, wow, we're actually really paying quite low. Maybe we should do a big salary review for the department, talk to everyone, how they're feeling about everything. And, let's see if we can bump up everyone's salary a little bit just to stop anyone from leaving.
Yeah, it's a good point because if you've got candidates coming in telling you that they're on X amount and they're working for your competitors, well, you could probably reasonably expect that your competitors will start looking more enticing towards your current employees.
Correct.
Employees.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's imperative, obviously, for trying to get the candidate over the line. But, yeah, for anything, it's just good market research and helps you keep your staff. But, other than that, it just prevents a lot of time wasting. If it isn't going to match, then,
it's not going to match. Like, it's just the way it is.
Don't go down the path of reference checking, psychometric assessment. And we've seen so many examples where you've got a candidate, it's all the way to the end of the process. And, we've been given a rough salary guide at the start to work off, and we know the candidates are within that. But there's so many variables throughout the process that can dictate and change the salary that they want. And they get right to the end of the process and the offer's about to come and you ask them, have you talked about salary? And they say, no, we'll just have to see what they send through.
Yeah.
And the salary comes through and it's 20, 30K out.
Yeah.
And, both parties have just dedicated almost 2 or 3 weeks to this process.
Correct.
And it's for nothing.
Yeah. And if you tell them at the start, look, this is the range, there's a vehicle involved, et cetera, then the offer comes through and it's 15, 20% less than the range you'd originally given, and there's no vehicle suddenly, they're not going to take the job.
Yeah, exactly. And that probably raises a good point that I want to bring up is if you do give a range, if your range is 60 to 70, you have to be willing to pay 70 or offer 70 to someone that ticks all the boxes. Like if you're a construction dealer with a specific brand, and someone comes in and they've got 8-9 years experience with your competitor, they just tick all the boxes. There's not a single negative thing you could say about them other than the fact that they haven't got your brand experience, but that's obviously because you're the only one that distributes that product. Then you have to be willing to go to the upper end of the scale if you've given them that scale, because they're thinking, well, what else am I missing?
Yeah.
So if you then offer them the lower end of the scale, which implies that they haven't ticked all the boxes, well, they're going to wonder what boxes they haven't ticked.
Yeah.
And if the only box is that they haven't got your brand experience, but you're the only distributor of that brand, well, that's an impossible box to tick.
Yeah, it's the old tale of, there's the range is 70 to 80. The candidate applies thinking 80. The employer puts the job out thinking 70.
Yeah.
And so they hopefully will meet somewhere in the middle, but sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah. So, if you're going to go range, the range needs to be real.
Yeah.
And it needs to not just be – because I know there's a lot of companies out there will just use the range to make the if it's going to be 60K, they'll put 60 to 70 to make it look more enticing.
To get people in who usually look at 70 – but then be like, but I've interviewed with them. Everything seems really good. They've told me all about the opportunities and stuff. So I think I'll take the pay cut.
Yeah.
I think I'll take the cut.
Yeah. And that will not work out in the long run. And it will actually, even if they take the job, it will cost more money and more time and effort and waste more time and effort in the long run than anything else.
Correct.
So, stick to what the actual range is. And, if there is a range, put it in there, but make sure that you're willing to pay it.
That's right.
Otherwise, I think that just about covers everything. As I said, there's a lot of different subtopics we could talk about during such a topic like this. So if you do have any thoughts, any questions, tips, etc., for different topics or subtopics on this one, please shoot them through. There's a contact information in the show notes below. But otherwise, we'll be back again next week with another episode. And thank you for listening.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Adding Fuel to the Hire. If you have any questions or you'd like to hear us talk about a particular topic, why not send us an email at podcast@addingfueltothehire.com. If you like what we do and would like to support our podcast, please leave a review on your podcasting app of choice. For further information, please visit our website, addingfueltothehire.com.